a crappy night's sleep last night. I'm going to take it easy tonight. Take a pill.
Yeah.
To sleeping pill.
Yeah.
I don't like them. Sometimes you got to use them.
Oh, well, especially in your game. So
I want to ditch that bakery job. Tell you that now.
We're live, buddy.
Awesome.
And before we get into, so we've got a comment here. I think. I thought I saw a comment here from R2R3 Locking Nut. Maybe. Okay, I don't know. Maybe I'm just dreaming. So we're live. Got a couple of people watching, which is pretty cool. And welcome to part 2 of the Exile On Main St series. So got some good feedback again, Carl. I have to do a couple of shout outs before we get into the show.
Yep.
Guitar Hack, a guy called Pepper from Canada. I watched him when I was at work. Him and Simon were on, and they had a chat for about an hour and a half. So that was interesting listening to them. So Simon had a shout out to us, so we'll shout back out to Simon. Simon enjoyed it, which is good. So yeah, it's always good to catch up with these guys that we've had a relationship with that are on other shows. That's what I love about the community.
Yes.
The fact that you can find people that share something that you have a passion for, albeit halfway around the world.
I was just going to say, technology is great because we can, be live in New Zealand via England, via Canada, talking about an English band and talking about Chicago,
So we've got Jimmy T in the show. So Jimmy T is always a regular supporter of our show, Carl. Jimmy T's from Aussie.
Oh, cool.
R2R3 did make a comment. Hey, Andrew. Hey, Carl. I wanted to drop in and say hello. It's midnight here, and I wish I can stay and chat, but I'll catch the replay tomorrow. So, no, it's no problem. See, that's what I like about it, mate. People just drop in a nice comment on YouTube.
Yeah. Why not? Absolutely.
Does it take much of an effort to drop something positive? Probably, when you consider how many negative comments are out there.
It can make your day.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. Hey, so Exile on Main St, part 2. I'll just keep the chat up. Exile on Main St, part 2. So I don't know how we're going to sort of run this show. You and I had a bit of a chat before about a couple of things that we could talk about. I suppose what I want to do to kick things off, in the process of doing a little bit of research for the show, there's a couple of things that I didn't know. The first thing that I'd like us to talk about, or probably you already knew, Carl, but I didn't realize how many songs on Exile on Main St were old songs. I've got a list here. Loving Cup, also known as Give Me a Drink.
Yep.
Its first sessions were going back to June 69.
Yep.
Stop Breaking Down was recorded in Olympic back in June 1970. Sweet Virginia, June, July, October 1970. Shine a Light, July 1970.
Yep.
Sweet Black Angel, also known as Bent Green Noodles, recorded back in Stargroves, November 1970. And Tumbling Dice, also known as Good Time Woman, back in May, March 1970. Wasn't aware of that, mate. Wasn't aware that those songs were a couple of years old.
Yeah, I knew of a couple, but I didn't realize there was that many. I remember Loving Cup, and that was around the time Mick Taylor joined. I think they even did some raw versions at the Hyde Park concert, possibly. I'm not sure. Of Loving
So that
Cup.
so that Hyde Park DVD we've got, that's not complete.
No, it's disappointing. Like it's not a full, not a full set list at all. It's really disappointing. Sounds terrible. The camera work's shoddy. We're lucky to have maybe 6 songs, but really, it should have been more well planned out. It was a bit of a shame. I remember as a kid, Boys High, I was fourth form, and a friend of mine said, I've got the DVD to Hyde Park.
Hey, Michael.
And was staying at my grandparents and got on a 10 speed and raced around, and really excited to see it, but a little bit disappointed at the same time. But, that's, we're talking 50 years ago. But,
yeah.
But I want to mention, I'm glad you mentioned that. I did some revisiting. Keith mentioned that period from Let It Bleed up to Exile was just an amazing creative time for all of them. They were just on fire. Even to the point where they called Exile Sticky Fingers' older brother, because a lot of the stuff was left over from Sticky Fingers too. Because the space in between Sticky Fingers and Exile was only about a year, maybe less. They were just, it was oozing out of them. Riffs, lyrics, songs. You even look at where they recorded all the songs. I mean, we all think of the Nellcote in France, and a lot of that stuff was recorded at Mick's house and different studios, and it was a real ramshackle.
Well, I think the great thing about the south of France, though, is that it helped create that mystique that we've talked about so many times in previous shows, didn't it? The south of France was the place where a lot of artistic people from England went previously, and aristocrats, ventured and and had fun on the Mediterranean. I think what's also interesting, though, about leading up to that whole exile and that aura that's important, I suppose, is the fact that the Stones, they didn't make a big deal about the fact that they were leaving or had to leave. They sort of like, oh, okay, yeah, didn't get angry about it, and just went along. And I think we mentioned it on the last show, didn't we, that the most important thing for a band was that, especially in their situation at that time, was that they had to make a record and tour off it, didn't they, to pay their debts?
Yeah. I imagine getting some independence back too, because they were fighting Alan Klein. They probably wanted, and obviously just started up their own label. They probably wanted to get. They probably felt they were in bondage a little bit, so this was a chance to be free.
Oh, absolutely. When you consider the fact that no band had done what they were doing, starting up their record label, like you just said, getting a distribution network going with Atlantic, and basically what they were doing, and they didn't realize it, is that they were providing the blueprint for every other band in the 1970s and probably 80s to follow, didn't they?
Yeah. And I was thinking about this before. And I guess it started with Get Yayas Out, but when you release an album, a good album, and then you tour off it and you have a hit song. And Charlie Watts mentioned this a long time ago. If America loves you, the rest of the world's going to love you. all their tours always start in America, and then they follow on the year later to Europe, Australia, New Zealand, various places. So they had a lot of work cut out.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And another. So, just help me here with a couple of dates, because when was Exile on Main Street released? Have you got that information handy?
Have a look. Early, it's like February 72 or something.
Just hold on. I'm sorry. I thought I had that information here. So the information I've got is May 72.
May 72. Yep, that's fact.
Okay, so
but it was recorded in lots of little stages over a period of a year. And then the bulk of the recording obviously was in France. And then it was all mixed and glossed up in Los Angeles.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, recorded from June to October on the mobile studio. So we know that. And then Sunset Sound Studios, they did a whole lot of mixing, and I suppose what we have to be mindful of here is that it was lead vocals, instrumental overdubs, and backing vocals were added to many of the tracks. So it was more than a mixing. It was probably for I don't know what the term is, but jeepers, it was more than just mixing, wasn't it?
Yeah. I like the fact they still kept it raw. They could have butchered it, and that's the good thing about Mick and Keith is when we mentioned the word independence before, they had control over their recordings too. They really wanted to be in the engineering room as well. There's that famous photo or shot of Keith with the Rolling Stones tongue T-shirt with his Gibson in that LA studio sitting on a Fender amp. Oh, you've probably seen that shot. It's a famous photo.
Mm.
And that pretty much sums up what they were doing. You know, they're basically just getting the polishing it up a little bit in the sense as far as getting it market ready.
Okay, well, because what's interesting here is that most of the research that I've done say that Mick stopped the mixing at Sunset Sound Studios did that from January to March 72, Carl.
Yeah.
But the Bible, Manvanley's book, says, and this is where I want to ask you your opinion on this. How long does a record company need before it can finish a record and do a drop? Because this book says that Mick was choosing which takes and even which songs to include on the album, and that process would extend until May.
Yeah, obviously they got their dates wrong because it takes a while to. Well, yeah, it's a tough one.
I think I think this might be a typo, because if it was released in May and they were working on it in May, jeepers, how long do they need to press some records?
Well, there's a lot involved. They didn't want it to come out as a double, and they were fighting back and forth. And then you got the artwork, and then you've got like you say, the mixing. They have to drop a single first to get some buzz, and then they have to do the promotional albums first, which takes time because they've got to mail them to all the radio stations.
I'm going to do some more research on that one, buddy, because
yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see. So Mick played a big role in that mixing. So all credit to Mr. Jagger.
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine. I mean, obviously, a lot of the songs recording in that basement, they would have been really raw. So, and we know that there was a lot of sessions guys, and Mick and Keith being pretty particular, they would have had to add some touches back in Los Angeles with a more of a high-tech studio, as evident with the extra players later on at the end. But, it's still a great record. I mean, Keith loves it. Mick's got mixed emotions over the record. He says, it's a capture of time, but we can't really play those songs live. We struggle. It's just, so a lot of those songs they don't play live, do they? I mean, obviously they do Tumbling Dice.
I don't care what Mick thinks about it.
Keith said, actually, sorry, Bill Wyman and Charlie both said that the critics panned it. They said, what's going on here? Or total rubbish. But it stood the test of time. It's actually revered as a high point in the Stones' career. Like a cult movie. It became an underground classic. Like you mentioned before, a reference point for other bands, a look, a feel, a swagger, a blueprint.
There's another concept or an idea that I'd like to get your opinion on. I remember having a discussion about this years ago. For our viewers overseas, here in Auckland. In Auckland, we used to have a venue called Main Street, and that was a live venue where New Zealand bands used to play. And I think they got their name Main Street, obviously, off Exile on Main Street. Because they weren't on the main street. But I remember having a conversation. So what was Exile on Main Street? Before I knew much about the album, I knew that the Stones were a blues band. My initial image of Main Street was a small little five shop town in the south of America. But when you listen to that album and you have the record in front of you and you look at it, clearly Main Street isn't a southern town, isn't it? It's the main street of New York, isn't it?
Yeah. I think that Mick and Keith have got differing opinions on what Main Street meant. Mick said that Main Street was like a place in Los Angeles where almost like a red light district where it was. And then Keith's opinion of Main Street was a high profile place where the Stones were exiles in a high profile place. So yeah.
Does it matter? Does it matter? Does it matter what the main street is? I suppose if the main street for me is image that's completely different from yours, the Rolling Stones have done their job.
Well, it's a cool name and title and album cover. I found out that front cover was a photo taken from a tattoo parlor. So, and as we know, it's a classic shot. Many musicians have those T-shirts. I think you've got the T-shirt. But yeah, Main Street is. Yeah, I'd love to actually know what it really means.
I'm glad you mentioned the cover, because again in my research, obviously Robert Frank, the who's described as the 1950s beat photographer, was instrumental in giving them that perspective for that cover, wasn't he?
Yeah. The theme was take a picture of really outrageous people.
Outrageous people who are normal, who actually exist, who are doing things in their normal daily life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you're walking down the street and there's someone doing something who looks completely different than you, but they're quite normal in their own minds.
And it's
Yeah.
probably, in a way, thinking, just having an epiphany. It probably influenced some girls' cover too, a little bit. All the little pictures and that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got the beatniks. That was pretty influential artistic movement, wasn't it, in America in the 1950s? And the Beats generation was a desire to celebrate a weird America, where one diverges massively from the sanitized version of what's happening on television and on the movies. So, we don't want that. We want what's real.
But it just shows you again how the Stones were, I wouldn't say ahead of their time, but looking back, it's just so timeless. I mean, 1972, 43 plus 4, 46 years ago. And it's still fresh to this day.
I'm not going to say that they were ahead of their time. I'm going to say that they were completely at the point of the vortex. They were, what they were doing, the way that they were recording that album, the way it was mixed, the art, everything, where it was recorded. That was the point, and everything else followed it, and everyone else just rode on that energy.
Yes. Yeah, and like I said before, they had just a treasure trove, a chest full of unfinished songs and B-sides and leftovers, and Charlie Watts said it was just incredible because they'd start out with the riff, and then Mick would finish some lyrics, and in a way France was a good place because it gave them discipline, because everybody was confined to that particular area. They couldn't leave, or so, and don't forget also the sunshine and it would have been a great time to be around. They would have helped. They would have brightened their mood. Just the Riviera.
Yeah, well, in that DVD, Stones in Exile, what's interesting is they're interviewing that guy Dominique Tal, the photographer who got invited by Keith to stay, and Dominique understood very clearly that he was capturing something that was important. He was very clever, obviously very artistic, and he could understand that these guys were, again, on the cutting edge of something. But what's interesting is that he makes a comment about how Keith was very devoted to his family. He enjoyed being a father. He was spending a lot of time with his family. So you're right. They enjoyed that Riviera. There's one side of the coin where they, and we know that famous side, of parties and jamming all night, and and they had Jacques, the fat chef, who was cooking them all these gourmet meals, and and they had the best drugs in the world, but also they were being fathers.
Well, there's great black and white photos of Anita and the children, and various band members' kids, and balconies, and acoustic guitar, and the sun shining. It would have been a magical time. It would have been a musician's dream, even just to be a sessions guy. I mean, you mentioned Bobby Keys last week. I mean, what did he say? This is rock and roll, you know?
He was in rock and roll heaven, young man. Yeah. And he was a hot shot himself, and he was quite, as you quite rightly pointed out, heavily influential in giving the Stones some credibility, that they needed in presenting a portrait of American music. That they need, and he was you couldn't, larger than life, wasn't he?
Yeah, that horn section was basically all Americans, Southerners. So it's just, in a way, it's quite good in the sense that adversity can bring about some magic. I mean,
Soda's asking. Sorry, mate. Soda's asking, how many kids does Keith have? He has a few, doesn't he?
He's got a son. He lost a child.
Theodora, a daughter.
I think one of his daughters is a model.
About 3 kids.
Yeah. I would say no more than 4, but at least 3 that he knows of. Brian Jones had about 4 before 16. Well, Keith's got how many kids got Mick's got? 10, right? Or 9 or 8?
Yeah, a few.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading up before that Ronnie Wood called Exile his favorite album. So here is, we mentioned influential. Here is a lot of bands probably listening to this thing thinking, wow, how can these guys be so loose, so out of time, but so good? So I think a lot of it was basically song selection, their vast knowledge of influences, Slim Harpo, Shake Your Hips, Stop Breaking Down, Robert Johnson, some of the political activism, Sweet Black Angel. You mentioned before the Open G influence with the slide and the riffs. These other bands were like, what the hell's going on? Here we are doing all these, I mean, we're writing some songs and doing a few covers, but everything sounds robotic. These guys are all over the show, but it works.
Yeah, so, and I don't know if this is probably this might be a show in itself, I suppose, but we all know that Keith played a couple of Open G songs and Sticky Fingers, but certainly Exile on Main Street is the album where Keith certainly was stamping his sound. That Open G sound was all over that album, and I think that's what gives it some credibility. As far as keeping it together, because you're absolutely right. If you listen to it, and this is what the critics were saying when they first heard it, they were listening to this album going, it's all over the place.
Exactly. They because up to that point, I mean, besides your acid rock and prog rock and stuff that didn't really stand the test of time, albums were very mechanical. 2 to 3 minute songs, a guitar solo in the middle, especially the rock format. So it's like, and Sticky Fingers started that a little bit with that Santana vibe a little bit. Getting a bit loose. So, in a way, the Stones were influenced not only by the blues, but they were saying thank you back to the American rockers, EOMS and the Santanas.
I just want to show. So, Soda's asking something. So you're right, Soda. So there's only 5 strings on an Open G. So can you see that's my one that's set up permanently in open G. So what Keith does is he gets rid of that bottom E string, and when you strum that you get your open G chords. So yeah, but I think what's really important though, Carl, about Exile on Main Street is the riffs.
Yeah.
Rocks Off, Happy, Ventilator Blues, Tumbling Dice, all down the line. All these songs have that hook, that riff, that short riff that punches you, like the Beatles' Day Tripper and the Stones earlier with Satisfaction, Led Zeppelin with Dazed and Confused, Deep Purple, Smoke on the Water. These songs, and there's a shitload of them on that album, have distinctive riffs.
Yeah.
Pretty simple to play.
Mm. And we're fortunate, like Mick said, that they captured all this energy and creativity at one point, but later on they could not recreate it. I mean, they can play Satisfaction and Honky Tonk Woman and certain songs all day long at live concerts, but Exile they can't do. That's what else makes it really special.
Yeah, and Keith knew that he was creating something magical, something different when he was recording that album too, with the open G tunings. In his book, he talks about how he felt that he was being caged in standard tuning, and when he was playing an open G, he found out that he could try and discover playing something again, which gave it that balance, I suppose, of trying to invent something new.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he's becoming this visionary sort of rock god at the same time. But he didn't know that, did he? Because he was just trying to replicate something that he was hearing in his mind, in his mind's ears, I suppose.
Yeah, because he was flirting with it. Beggar's Banquet, he was using open E and open D, and then Let It Bleed, once again, the same sort of thing, various open E's and D's. And then I think everything kind of started to kick, everything kind of like you got a sound with Brown Sugar. That was open G, wasn't it? And then on Sticky Fingers, you had obviously your Brown Sugar. Sway was open D, but that was Mick Jagger playing. And then Can't You Hear Me Knocking? That's open D as well.
Open G.
Okay, so then he started to get a sound, and then they did a couple of other things on that album. Bitch was standard tuning, but everything open G really came to the forefront, like you said, on Exile. Really, that his sound was basically forged then, wasn't it?
Oh well, yeah, been forging, and being discovered all in the same time. What do you think about his? This is not a direct quote that he's made, but this is me just putting down a few words where he talks about the guitar part must sound simple and relate to other riffs, and more importantly, it's got to appear to be simple to play. Because Keith says that any guitarist who gives the impression that he's struggling, he's not going to make it in the theater of rock and roll.
No.
What do you think? What do you think about that?
I think the simple fact that he was never destined to be a good lead player was a blessing in disguise. The simple fact that he worked hard at rhythms. He went back to school with those old blues records when he had that time off in early '68 when they went back to the roots. I think that he really the less is more approach is what he's trying to talk about.
Cleared out the clutter is what he said.
Yeah, and we find it to this day with all walks of life. And I have a tendency to overthink and overdo everything. To cut it all out, it's all crap. Keep it simple.
Yeah, well, playing an open G gave him an opportunity where he can actually play some chords, and in a melodic way, as opposed to playing a scale.
Right.
So what's interesting about a lot of those Open G songs is that they're chords,
Yeah.
those riffs.
Well, if you're in standard tuning and you just bar, you don't do a bar chord, but you just bar one finger, it's a drone sound. But with the open tuning, he gets a sound, a lifelike sound, and plus he can use those hammer-ons and hammer-offs that he does so well, doesn't he? With the two fingers.
Jimmy's asking you why couldn't he be a lead player? I think that's Carl's opinion because I think he's a darn good lead player, but someone needs to play rhythm as well, don't they? And when you've got Mick Taylor in your band, you're not going to be able to knock him off the perch, are you?
Well, I think Keith's a great player in the sense that he knows his limitations. Most of his solos are very Chuck Berry inspired, which is great because I love Chuck Berry. But coming from a country of, the Guitar Heroes and the John Mayall school of blues players, he focused more on the sound of the band. We talked about this before, the engine sound, the sound of movement. Because, I mean, a lot of bands will have, for example, a virtuoso guitar player, but the rhythm would be pretty average. So he was unique in the sense that open tunings and the drummer followed him. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he basically unorthodox and broke all the rules, a little bit like Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Chuck Berry because in earlier guitar shuffles, that Richards had, obviously he was indebted to Chuck Berry, wasn't he? But with Exile, clearly Keith's finding his own voice, clearly.
Yeah, and going back a little bit to Let It Bleed and the Honky Tonk Woman, which probably was inspired by Ry Cooder and Graham Parsons, which you do really well. Those he left instead of Chuck Berry, started to focus on these country slides and double strings and double stops and some clever southern picking. So he really did. He mentioned it before. It's almost like learning the guitar all over again and loving it. Because you are right. I mean, how many times can you play E, A, and B and make it sound interesting on a standard tuning? I mean, they did a lot, but with Open G, it's, how do you describe it? It's the Stone sound. What Start Me Up? What key's that?
Oh, well, I don't know.
Open G again.
I'd have to get a guitar and but I think what Keith mentions this in his book, doesn't he? The dissident chord, and that's what you can call. If you guys in the chat want to check out Rocks Off, for example, that chord identifies with the song. That's what that's the perfect example of a dissident chord because what does he say? He says, a lot of blues is essentially drone songs, one of the most primal techniques of musical expression with ancient roots throughout the world and especially in Africa. So that's interesting because Keith must have been hearing this kind of music, obviously, in the music that he was listening to. What am I trying to say here?
Well,
Keith's hearing something in Chuck Berry. He's hearing something in Muddy Waters that we can't quite hear, and then he's reproducing that with the Open G Exile on Main Street songs.
Yeah, it's almost like open tuning at that point was basically with the slide guitar, and he started to bar chords, which was not necessarily unheard of, but no one else was doing it. Brian Jones knew of some open tunings because he was the slide player in the first inception of the Stones, and Keith was basically just playing the solos and standard tuning. But as we talked about before, listening to those old blues records, how come I can't play this? And Roy Curtis said, well, they're in different tunings, Keith. Okay. And then all of a sudden, he would have probably had the bottleneck or couldn't find the bottleneck and started to play around. That sounds pretty cool. What's going on here? And I think Brown Sugar was a really pivotal moment in capturing Keith's sound, because Honky Tonk Woman was a lot of slides and hammering on and offs, where Brown Sugar was a statement, wasn't it? And then obviously with his confidence growing,
yep.
Exile was basically, how do you describe it? Exile would have been just I'm lost for words.
So
chock full of riffs.
Because I've tried to learn a couple of Open G songs over the last few years. What's interesting is that Brown Sugar is just about chords.
Yep.
Honky Tonk Woman, there's a lot of slide going on there. There's a lot of slide fingering. So you're right. Open G is about Open G is about doing this, isn't it? Just doing that.
And that gave him basically a foundation of so many riffs. Up till this day, he's still playing around with that fretboard and Open G.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've spoken about it before. You try and play Brown Sugar or Honky Tonk Woman or any of these songs that are on Exile on Main Street in standard. Look, there's a lot of guys out there on YouTube and they sound pretty good, but even, and this is my opinion, and shoot me if you want, but the worst player playing that in Open G on YouTube, in my opinion, is going to sound better than the best player playing it in standard.
Yeah. Well, even Keith mentions it doesn't. It's too drony. It's too monotone. It just doesn't have the life and the, that special sparkle. Sparkle, I guess, is a good word. But yeah. I mean, and getting back to the songs on Exile, they were doing things they hadn't done before too. They were doing things like, I mean, shake your hips. I mean, trying different recording techniques and pedal steels and horn sections and larger backing vocals, and it was English guys in France sounding like Southern guys. It's crazy. It was just a magical moment. And Sweet Virginia, far out. What a song. And let's not forget the acoustic influence of that album too. A lot of good acoustic playing on there. So yeah. And kudos to Bill and Charlie. I mean, some great rhythm work. And Mick Jagger, what a singer. It's not easy to adapt to all those different songs. Not at all. So, there's too much good stuff there.
Yeah, I'll think. We had a series earlier where we were talking about some of our some of our favorite songs, and we picked a couple and we sort of talked about them and we spoke about them and and mentioned them. I think we went chronologically, didn't we?
Yeah, of the
which,
riffs.
which is good. But, you know, it's interesting, though, that you should talk about Sweet Virginia, because that's one of my favorite songs. And what's interesting about that song, again, if you're a guitar player, you know, it's an unorthodox chord progression that goes back to, well, according to my research, what they call ragtime. It's in the key of A, but starts off in the D chord, and then it's got a passing chord of B before coming back to the A chord. And
Wow.
normally the B chord would be the minor. So again, you know, amazing how these guys, obviously, Carl, what they were doing is they were sitting there, they were writing a song and playing it in the logical, what I would say, the logical progression, and then they would go back and say, well, look, what about if we throw this chord in here and throw this chord in there? So obviously that throwing the chord trick in was very much an English thing, because the Beatles did it too, didn't they, a couple of times?
Yeah.
But again, I suppose it's not English, because Buddy Holly did it too.
And it's the theme of the album. It's just it's unorthodox. You know, Rolling Stones are famous for breaking all the rules. What are rules? And let's not forget the influence of Graham Parsons. He was torn and frayed. So I mean, that's country and western to the bone. So for any music lover, you can't pinpoint that album down to a rock album. It's got all sorts.
Well, what does Bill Yanovitz call it? It's America's landscape. It's a landscape album.
Absolutely.
And you know, I've never been to America. I don't know. But when I hear it, I get an impression of what I think America was and probably still is.
Especially in the rural areas. I mean, Torn and Frayed, Sweet Virginia, Sweet Black Angel, Loving Cup, just and wow, Shine a Light. Just want to see his face. I mean, this is gospel. I mean, people like, is there anything they cannot do?
Hey, Wednesday. Just doing a shout out, Carl. Sorry for interrupting. Yeah. Wednesday Store has popped in and has just made a comment here. Sticky Fingers live at the Fonda Theatre is brilliant. Yeah, I've got that, and I think Carl has too. It came out in 2015.
Yeah.
Where they played that whole of the Sticky Fingers album. Not bad for some guys that were knocking on the door of 70.
Yeah. And Mick Taylor was there, was he? Or
yeah, Mick Taylor was playing the lead part. So top stuff. So I suppose to kind of round out this show before we, you know, continue on the series, I'd like to get your opinion on. So the Stones were counterculture. Part of the counterculture, weren't they? They were part of the counterculture and became right through, well, the late part of the 60s, symbols of the counterculture, and still managed to continue that through to the 70s very well, didn't they?
Absolutely. Rebels.
So I found this interesting quote by Marianne Faithfull, and earlier today. And I hate to go back to this drug thing, but it's interesting in the context of what we're talking about. She said that prior to the Stones getting busted, they were just the same as the Yardbirds, the Animals, and all these other groups, you know, that were around. As soon as they got busted, they were separate from the rest of these other bands.
Outlaws.
Yeah. And one other interesting band that got busted too a couple of times was the Beatles. So these bands who were supposed to be in competition with each other elevated themselves out of the hordes, I suppose, the pack.
Yeah.
Because according to Mary and Faithful, not me, it's because of the drug bust, and that's what created that aura of counterculture. And the Stones obviously went and did that pretty well, continued to build on that through the 70s.
Well, we elegantly wasted. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dangerous.
So what do you think? And we've touched on this many times, I suppose, and I'm sorry if we're repeating ourselves, but I suppose our opinions do change from week to week, and we do probably offer a different analysis. But do you think that was contrived by the Stones, or was it just something that happened?
I think it's something that happened, and the managers and themselves probably enjoyed the fact that they became not necessarily a dangerous band, but a band that had an edge. And we all, the famous term, the bad boys of rock and roll.
Mm.
That became their slogan. And I think they enjoyed it. Keith was a bit like Elvis Presley. He was deep down a wholesome, down to earth kind of guy, but he quite liked a little bit of that gangster image. He talks about a knife and packing them some heat and all that sort of stuff. And who wouldn't? I mean, a lot of people love to be feared. They weren't necessarily feared, but they were definitely considered authentic because of that. Not
so the Stones, because they were knocking on the door of 30 around that same period, 72. So they were giving some authenticity then to leading a rebellious lifestyle out of your 20s.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite funny because once the doors are shut, the cameras are off. Like you said before, Keith was a family man. So a lot of it was a lot of it was the media played on it too. And hey, it helps sell records. I remember my dad telling me, "Don't follow the Stones too much; they're a little bit dark."
And I certainly picked up on that vibe too. Like I said in the introduction to our first show, no one specifically told me don't, be careful. But I certainly knew that. Look, when I was at my nana's place and there was Beatles for sale over here and the Stones album over here, Give Me Shelter or something like that, I knew that this one was okay, but this one was this was the this was the dodgy one.
Yeah. There was something. 69 tour and Altamont, as we know, and then Sticky Fingers and Sway and Demon's Life Got You in Its Sway, and some darker themes and drugs in the lyrics. They were talking about some real things. Exile was probably the height of that because it was all documented that what they were doing was actually what they're singing about was real. They were not necessarily a dangerous band, but they were definitely living the rock star lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the great thing, I suppose, that we all share about music and being guitar players is that we've been listening to this music for a long time individually, and you can sit down and just listen to it again and just enjoy it for every time that you heard it, from the first time to the time that I was listening to it an hour ago. It's just it's great. I just don't get sick of it. I just there's just so much more there to discover. And I suppose it's because we're guitar players too, Carl, because we want to play this stuff. So we're listening to it differently. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. But getting back to the Stones, I mean, being full-time musicians and living a fast-paced life, they were just taking it as every day went by. I mean, they weren't actually trying to, part of their lifestyle was, hanger-oners, and they probably were easily led in certain things. And I don't think they were purposely trying to be bad. It was just, it was part of their, part of who they were. They weren't going to be told what to do. They were their own men.
Yeah, I think it goes back though deeper, mate, to you talking about a couple of themes in the series earlier, where we were talking about these blues giants. I think you made reference to the fact that these blues men were dangerous guys. It was a fact. Little Walter used to carry a knife. Would get into fights.
Gamble on the streets.
They were on tough streets. So, and a blues man was the symbol of someone who had a bit of success. Who was sophisticated enough to be able to mix in a few more social groups that the average black guy couldn't. So there was that dangerous element about being a blues man that automatically, I suppose, if you play the blues, is going to be an aura around you.
Absolutely. And
that's why you're so dangerous.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I like not necessarily the danger, but I like the fact that we mentioned the word before, authentic. It's real.
Real.
They're not confined by rules of society, or they're not told. I mean, Elvis was quite manufactured, where the Stones weren't, and that's the reason why the Stones are the greatest in the world, is because of that. Yeah, I mean, they were. Let's face it, they were leaders. They were not. I mean, a lot of those bands. I mean, Kiss are doing a farewell tour. They've been talking about farewell. They've been doing farewell tours for 25 years.
Yeah, that's what just upsets the hell out of me. This is this is not a direct kick in the guts to Kiss and their music, because I don't mind Kiss and their music. But it just makes a mockery of I suppose your legacy, because clearly it's only about the money.
Correct.
Whatever credibility or whatever coolness, whatever rebellion, whatever kind of countercultural statement you had, well, you've just burnt it in front of me as a Kiss fan.
Very corporate, and that's a good point to make about Exile. It was not a commercial album. I mean, Mick Jagger said there was no hits on the album. I mean, we got a number 23 spot for Tumbling Dice. That's what makes it also special. It was anti-commercial, anti-studio, anti-producers, anti-engineers. A bunch of guys in a living room in a foreign country.
Hey, Todd, we're just about to wind up the show, mate. So it's good to catch you here. I enjoyed seeing you on, what show were you on? Ben's show. I enjoyed watching you. So good for you to pop over here and have a listen to what Carl and I have been talking about. Jimmy T agrees with us too about touring these touring bands doing 5 or 6 or 7 bloody retirement tours.
No joke. I was driving down Interstate I-35, Austin, Texas. I think it might have been 2002 or 2003. And they've got every major city has a big sports arena, which they use for concerts.
Yeah.
Usually down the side of the freeway. Huge, massive arenas. And big flashing lights. Kiss's final farewell tour. 7 and 8, 15 years ago.
Jimmy's saying the same bloody thing. He said he saw Kiss's farewell tour 10 years ago.
Apparently it's been going on since 1996. So on Facebook, they had a thing about Kiss taking the piss out of the farewell tour. And I said, coming up in 2020, they'll have a farewell tour to remind everybody to say farewell from their previous farewell tour.
Oh my God, it's comical.
But I will point out though, as much as we love the dirt and the grit and the magical time on Exile, and we could talk about this maybe in a later show or research it way down the line. When they toured off that album and they started in America, that's when the Stones became a bona fide jet set band. You know.
Hey, I just want to answer a question here that so Wednesday Store he asked us this a couple of shows ago. Any studio episodes lined up? Carl and I did discuss that. Now we want to talk about the studio aspect, but just give us a bit of time because it's all about I suppose doing some research and getting some information and trying to work out how we want to talk about that because it's all about getting, I suppose, some information, some reference material Wednesday. So but that's certainly something that's lined up.
Yeah.
Next week, I've sort of mentioned to Carl earlier that maybe because we want to continue this theme of Exile on Main Street and talk about some songs, some extra songs as well. But we're going to talk about the 72 tour. So when we planned to do this show, Carl and I sort of, discussed, well, what are we going to talk about? We can talk about books and then we can talk about DVDs and then we can talk about tours. So we certainly want to talk about the Stones tours. We haven't talked about the 69 tour, so this isn't going to follow any timeline, but we'll be talking about the 72 tour next week.
Absolutely.
And then probably if we talk about the 69 tour, we'll have to talk about the album that was released at that time, which was Let It Bleed.
Yeah.
And then obviously, everybody that's probably watching this who's a Stones nut, what happened at Altamont. So that's something that we've got planned because, we all know there's a 50-year plus history of the Stones to talk about. So
absolutely. And those tours are coming off great albums. They're supporting a great album.
Yeah, so just to answer Jimmy T, so famous studios, famous recording gear. Look, I've got some reference material that talks about their gear. There's a book called, the Rolling Stones gear, but there's not a lot about the studios. So
yeah, the little bit I know is basically Olympic Studios was very much a big part of the Stones sound.
And obviously going to Chess Studios, recording on multiple tracks.
That was a big part of their career to play in a bona fide, and Aftermath being recorded in RCA Studios in Hollywood. So yeah, I mean, we could have maybe discussion about maybe the difference between American and English studios. It's something, like Andrew said, it's something very in depth.
And the mobile studio that I don't know anything about.
Yeah, and then I mean, it gets even deeper. I mean, Goat's Head Soup was recorded in Jamaica.
Yeah,
and then Black and Blue was recorded in Germany.
On what?
Yeah, so. and Some Girls was a very much an American sound, so that was obviously American studio. And we talked about Tattoo You with that great producer. So that's definitely something to investigate. Maybe the various studios and producers that helped their sound to create their sound.
Yeah, Todd's making an interesting comment here. Don't have the Hells Angels do your security. Yeah, well, that was just mayhem, wasn't it, Todd? And I certainly look forward to that show when we discuss that, because we do have some good material that we can base our opinions on. And if you guys haven't seen that Gimme Shelter DVD, check it out and just have a look at the faces of Mick and Keith. They're scared. They were scared.
In a way, and it's kind of sad. And there's a lot of, I've read a lot of books years ago about, the age of the Aquarius and Mick wearing the Scorpio and the 1969 and the 666 and Sympathy for the Devil, and they didn't play it for 5 years. And there's so much to talk about with that. But that's also what created the Stones' kind of darker image as well.
So Wednesday wants to know how many times you've seen the Stones. I've only seen them once, and that was on the Voodoo Lounge tour, 96. You've seen them a few times?
Twice.
Twice.
Yeah, the same tour you talked about, plus 2003, the 40 Licks tour, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they came here again, I'd make a point of going to see them. What about you, Wednesday? You seen them? Anyway, my friend, I've enjoyed the show, and so Wednesday saw them in July. Wow, how was it? Was it good? And he saw the Tattoo You too. Oh, the Tattoo You tour as well. Oh my God,
that would have been incredible.
Oh, that would have been. Yeah. That was when. Yeah, that would have been incredible. And went to Hyde Park, London. Jeepers! This Wednesday stores a Stones nut.
That's wow. My dream would have been to probably see them. My dream would have been to see them, and I would have been -7 years old, but the '69 tour would have been pretty amazing. And I was thinking about this before, and we could talk about this we'll talk about the '72 show, but the '72 tour, we mentioned about the jet set lifestyle, is the first time that the Stones became a larger band with horn sections and multiple keyboard players and stuff. '69 was just the band really, and Ian Stewart on a few songs.
I'm just making a shout out, Carl, that if anybody wants to join us, so we're pretty much going to be doing the shows on this time frame. So if it suits anybody, if anyone wants to come on on the Google Hangout, just message me, and Carl and I will be more than happy to have someone jump on and offer some of their opinions on the Stones. Just give us a message.
Yeah. I mean, he mentioned those tours. I mean, it's a great topic to talk about what you saw on that particular show.
Well, that's going to be that was supposed to be one of our series, wasn't it? The Stones tours.
Well, because we know on random shows that Eric Clapton might join them for a song, or multiple people have joined them on, Stevie Wonder, and it just goes on and on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Even Taylor Swift.
Christina Aguilera.
Oh my God. I can't believe I said that.
Oh no, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay. I'm going to sign off because it's dinner time. And
Yeah, apologise. I just realised my light bulb's out, so that's why my face is so dark.
oh, it's okay.
I don't even have a light bulb here, so yeah.
You're just getting ready for later. That's all. Getting your night eyes on.
Yeah. But no, recapping, I guess that would conclude the Exile series as far as the album's concerned, and how it, to this day, stood the test of time. As the critics later said, sorry, someone calling through. Woogie rock and roll, R&B, and just good time, like you mentioned, the American landscape. Beautiful.
Yeah. So yeah. So if you guys want to join us, Carl and I will be on the same time next week, and we'll be talking about the 72 tour. Because if you're going to be talking about Exile on Main Street, you have to talk about have a chat about that tour. And ladies, if you guys haven't seen Ladies and Gentlemen the Rolling Stones, it's there's a lot of clips on YouTube. There's a DVD available. It's not on digital download on iTunes, and there is an audio version of it available on Spotify. So if you guys want to do some homework, check that album out.
It's great. All right.
Thanks everyone.
Good night, everyone.